Good morning. Welcome to the George Show. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in once again for George Brauchler. Listeners to the show may have noticed his voice was a little shakier on Tuesday. He's been a little under the weather, so I'm happy to sit in once again for good old George Brauchler. News Talk 710 KNUS. Great to be with you today. Once again, with so much to talk about and some great guests to conversate with, but nobody better than you at 303-696-1971. That is our telephone number if you want to join in to the festivities. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. And by all means, please do tweet at me. I'm in the Twitterverse at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And then there's a couple ways you can email yours truly directly. One is going to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show page at 710knus.com and shooting me an email from there. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show Saturday mornings from 6 to 9 right here on 710 KNUS. And you can also message me via my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Keep in mind, there's no A, I, or U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is E-Z. Again, the telephone number, of course, 303-696-1971. Just this week, on Tuesday, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to establish a select committee to assess, as Politico summarizes it, the myriad military, economic, and technological challenges posed by China, kicking off an effort that was a major pillar of the Republican national security agenda. Lawmakers voted 365 to 65, pretty darn bipartisan there, to set up the panel, which will be chaired by Wisconsin Representative Mike Gallagher, a steadfast China hawk. We will be joined by none other than Gordon G. Chang as our first guest in the next segment to get his thoughts on what's happening with this China Select Committee, what they should focus on, and some of the issues right now going on relative to the Chinese Communist Party. This is a very important topic and issue. Gordon G. Chang always has fascinating insights. He's the author of several different books on China as well as North Korea, and as a columnist for the Daily Beast, who's written for numerous publications. We'll be getting his insights coming up here in just a little bit. Then the top of the next hour, how often do you hear that a city, especially a big city, has rolled back a tax? That's exactly what we saw in Aurora on Monday night when the city council, with Mayor Mike Coffman breaking the tie, voted to eliminate their occupational privilege tax because it was such a privilege. Such a privilege to work in Aurora, right? Well, they got rid of the occupational privilege tax, eliminating it in the city of Aurora. And we will speak with the tie-breaking voter himself, Mayor Mike Coffman, at the top of the hour to field his thoughts on this, why, especially as a former longtime small business owner prior to getting into politics, and once he started getting into politics at the legislature, I should say, what his perspective is on why that's important, especially now when the cost of everything seem to be rising. Mayor Coffman will join us just after 7 o'clock here on the program. Then, I know George touched on it a bit the other day. I haven't had a chance really to sink my teeth into it, but there's an extreme radical gun control bill that has been proposed already in the state legislature. They're not wasting any time on it. Elizabeth Epps, a radical far-left Democratic socialist, has introduced the bill, which would ban so many kinds of guns. Think most and probably require confiscation. I mean, just how flagrantly unconstitutional is this? We will break that down and more with David Kopel of the Independence Institute coming up at about 9 o'clock and get his expert insights over there, because this is such a catastrophic bill to be proposed and really shows the mindset of some Democrats and how extreme they really are on the issues of gun control and gun rights. That is to say, our constitutionally protected natural right to keep and bear arms. We'll dive into that with David Kopel. So, coming up on the program, Gordon G. Chang, Mayor Mike Coffman, and David Kopel all joining us here this morning. Plus, again, you at 303-696-1971. That is our telephone number, 303-696-1971. We will also later on in the show talk a little bit about Jeff Beck. I have a couple of little personal stories related to him as far as my first concert that I ever saw and so forth. We will get to that a little bit coming up in the 7 o'clock hour as well, after speaking with Mayor Mike Coffman. But first, Biden's legal team found another batch of classified documents in search of a second location. And even more significantly, the media is asking about it. The media is pushing back. The media is wondering whether there will be more that will turn up and what the explanations are, what's going on. More classified documents. Heck, let's go from CNN. President Joe Biden's legal team found another batch of classified government records following the initial discovery of classified documents at his former think tank office in Washington this past fall. People briefed on the matter told CNN Wednesday. Searches for additional documents took place after Biden's lawyers found the initial classified documents in early November, the people said. One of the sources told CNN that effort led to the discovery of additional documents of interest to federal officials reviewing the matter. NBC News first reported the new batch of classified documents. The discovery of the classified documents in his former office in November set off alarm bells inside the White House, where only a small circle of advisors and lawyers were aware of the matter. An effort was launched to search other locations where documents from Biden's time as vice president may have been stored. Now, I haven't seen, if we know, it doesn't appear that we do, where the second tranche of documents was found. We don't know much as far as the specific details. Unless I've missed something, I don't think we know the number of documents in the second batch, only that it has been confirmed that another batch of classified documents were found at a second location, not at the same office at the University of Pennsylvania, where the first batch came from. Now, this has raised a lot of questions that literally are being asked by the media and sometimes getting contentious with Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary. Here's an example of, I think, Ed O'Keefe, is he with CBS News or the Washington Post? I think he used to be with one of them. Yes, CBS News. He used to be with the Washington Post. And things got a little bit contentious when he pressed her. Take a listen to this.
On like day 2 of this administration, when he swore all of you in, the president said, quote, "I'm going to make mistakes. When I make them, I'll acknowledge them and I'll tell you. And I'll need your help to help me correct them." So you're the one here talking to us about this. That's why we're asking you. So let's just remember that.
We don't need to have this. We work very well together. We don't need to have this kind of confrontation. Ask your question and I will answer them the best that I can.
Part of the reason we're laying that out is because you're laying out your part of the job.
I know, but I'm just saying that we don't need to have contention. You don't need to be contentious with me here, Ed.
The president was asked yesterday, but did not answer this part of the question. Why didn't he or someone in the White House inform the American people when these documents were discovered on November 2nd? Did it have anything to do, because people are asking this part of it, did it have anything to do with the fact that the election was just a few days away?
Again, Ed, this is under review by the Department of Justice. It is literally under review right now. As I am talking to you, it is under review. So I'm not going to get beyond the process. I'm not going to get beyond what the president said.
Whoa. That was pretty rare. Normally you just hear Steve Doocy, or Peter Doocy rather, over at Fox News, going toe-to-toe with Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary. But there you had Ed O'Keefe of CBS News tussling with her a bit, particularly on why they only found out. See, here's the thing, though. The media doesn't like being in the dark on certain stories. They would rather be in on it, I would think, if they want to have it sort of covered up for whatever reason, or they want to expose it because it can be good fodder for them to work with. So it's understandable why they would get frustrated. Well, the questions kept coming. As at yesterday's press conference, Jean-Pierre couldn't even say as well if there were any other documents improperly stored. Now, it seems like they don't know how many documents and where they were stored.
There are no assurances you can provide at this point that there are no other classified documents out there in any other office in Norfolk.
Again, this is an ongoing process, so I'm going to let the process continue. It is being reviewed by the Department of Justice, and I'm just going to leave it there.
So this is striking because we have a second batch that was found by Biden's lawyers. We don't know details about how many documents were recovered, at least to my knowledge, and we don't know where that location was. It begs one to ask further, where are additional documents? Can they be found? Could they be in other locations? Well, it's not a real hard jump to go from where we are now to, yes, there are a couple other locations with them. Now, of course, there are national security concerns that come from classified documents. Now, we hear a lot about President Trump, and there are issues relative to cooperation with the FBI and subpoenas and all of that at Mar-a-Lago. There are distinct differences, of course, in the two cases. Let's just acknowledge that right now. That's beside the point when it comes to how many places are there with these classified documents? How well secured are they? How vulnerable could they be? What contents could those entail? Those questions should be asked of President Biden, not just former President Trump. What did Biden do with these documents from when he was vice president of the United States? How many classified documents are out there? What was the basis for that? And even more, as Lindsey Graham and others have been asking, will Merrick Garland appoint a special counsel now to look into the Biden documents, or at least a special master, so that you have a little bit of a distance? Because that's supposedly the objective, right? You want to remove politics from it, so you don't have Garland himself directly overseeing the Trump investigation. Why not do something similar with the investigation into Joe Biden's documents, classified documents? It goes even further with Karine Jean-Pierre, because there's also questions about why lawyers for Biden were rifling through his closets at his private office.
Can I just ask if you have any information about why the president's personal attorneys were at the Penn Biden Center in the first place? Were they looking for something specific? Was there something specific they were doing going through these documents? It just seems like to send, if it was just routine moving stuff to send a personal attorney to do that
I would
as well.
refer you to the White House counsel's very extensive kind of information on Monday that they provided. So I refer you to that.
You know, in fairness, I do think she kind of has to do that because this is a legal issue that isn't a White House matter per se. This is a matter of Biden. But being able to have some sort of a concrete answer to provide would be at least just a little bit better. Now, what's questionable is what Biden knew in terms of these documents. How many documents, classified documents, was he aware were in his possession post vice presidency? Apparently, he was really surprised about these classified documents being at the University of Pennsylvania in the first place.
His lawyers did the right. Again. He was surprised that the records were there. He spoke to this personally. He was surprised that the records were there.
Very surprised. And of course, here is some of what Biden said a few days ago in Mexico.
But I don't know what's in the documents. My lawyers have not suggested I ask what documents they were. I've turned over the boxes. They've turned over the boxes to the archives, and we're cooperating fully with the review, and which I hope will be finished soon, and there'll be more detail at that time.
Well, we have more details that we're learning here and there, like another batch. Now, it will be something to see what unfolds from here, but the politics are looking better and better for Republicans. The optics are. And it isn't looking too good for Biden, at least to some extent. We'll pick up the conversation on this topic later on in the program, but I wanted to get a full update right to start things off. And in a couple hours, we'll come back to the topic of Biden's classified documents. Listener text, can you imagine how many classified documents Obama has at his various offices around America? Who knows? Who knows for all former presidents? Trump, Biden as former vice president, other former vice president, Obama, Clinton, probably not much from Carter. I don't know. But we got to run to a break because Gordon G. Chang is warming up in a bullpen. We'll check in with the author of several books on China and North Korea to dive into this new select committee on China that the U.S. House just voted to create for this current Congress. Keep it right here. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. We are just getting started here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Good morning. Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler today. News Talk 710 KNUS. Thanks for joining us, being a part of the program. Well, we have received word in the last couple of days that the U.S. House has already embarked on something that Republicans promised they would do right after taking office. Politico reporting a couple of days ago that the U.S. House voted to establish a select committee to assess the myriad military, economic, and technological challenges posed by China, kicking off an effort that was a major pillar of the Republican national security agenda. Lawmakers voted 365 to 65 to set up that panel, which will be chaired by Wisconsin Representative Mike Gallagher, a steadfast China hawk. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy hailed the establishment of the panel. The resolution creating the committee was the second measure the Republican-led House passed, and McCarthy promised the new panel will help, quote, win this economic competition with Beijing after winning the speaker's gavel last week. Of course, there are issues ranging from Taiwan and the security situation in the Taiwanese Strait, the relationship between the U.S. and Japan vis-a-vis China, what the Chinese military is doing, and so many other issues in addition to that economic point. What should this new select committee regarding the Chinese Communist Party do and focus on at this point in time? Gordon G. Chang is the author of several books, including most recently The Great U.S.-China Tech War, as well as several books on North Korea and South Korea. He is a columnist for the Daily Beast and numerous publications where he has written op-eds and appears on various cable news networks, including the Fox News channel. And I've had the great pleasure of interviewing Gordon Chang, who you could follow on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang for the past several years. Always a pleasure to welcome him. Gordon, good morning. Happy New Year and welcome.
Well, Happy New Year, Jimmy, and thank you so much.
It's good to be with you as always. So let me just sort of get your big picture reaction. It was the second piece of legislation, so to speak, a resolution that the House passed. It was broad bipartisan support, 65 dissenters, but pretty darn good in a Congress like this. What do you make of the establishment of this select committee on China?
Well, first of all, it's a good thing that they're focusing on China, which is a much bigger threat than any other state or any other group of actors. The important thing here is time. We've had all of these recommendations from the Congressional Executive China Commission, as well as the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. So we know what to do. It's just a question of time because it is of the essence. I don't know why 65 members of the Congress would vote against this, and that's a big issue. But the point is, it looks like it does have bipartisan support, and I hope that Mike Gallagher obtains that support and moves fast.
Yeah, one thing that you definitely want on a committee like this is not just a soapbox opportunity, right? You want them to actually be talking substantively and putting forward legislation from the committee that can actually take action, and hopefully things that will have support over in the United States Senate as well.
Yes. Well, there's certain things that should go through pretty quickly. So, for instance, reporting requirements. There is so much Chinese money flowing into the U.S. Much of it is unreported, even though there is federal legislation on this, but we can tighten those rules. So, for instance, money that goes to colleges and universities, they only have to report it from a foreign source if it's $250,000 or more. That threshold should come down to very, very low number. But also, I think that essentially we're seeing China move not only against its neighbors, but against the U.S. This is time for the committee to start cutting the flow of money to China because China can only threaten us with our cash. And so this should be a simple thing. We also have these police stations that the Chinese have established in the U.S. I think the committee can do a lot to make sure the FBI investigates these and moves fast.
You say police stations established in the United States. What is that about?
Well, in Chinatown and in other locations throughout the U.S., various organizations in China have established locations. The Chinese embassy in the U.S. says that they're only to help Chinese citizens get driver's license and things. Well, even that is objectionable because they need to have a consulate to do that. But Chinese media in China actually talks about these locations providing police functions, investigative functions, and so that clearly is a violation of American sovereignty. We've permitted this for far too long. This is our country. I think that the Select Committee can, when they look at the FBI's budget, can talk about where their priorities should be and direct the administration to the extent that they can under our separation of powers to close these locations immediately.
Wow, that's deeply disturbing. Let's talk about Taiwan. As you know, back in October, I visited Taiwan for a little over a week as part of an international press tour. A fascinating experience and a Q&A with the ambassador, or rather the minister, the foreign minister there. And it was definitely very informative for me, to be sure. But one thing that I learned is how significant the relationship really is between the United States and Taiwan, and how fundamental it is to security in the region and to keeping China's militaristic ambitions in check. What do you hope this committee does in regards to Taiwan, Gordon G. Chang?
Well, I would like to see them mandate higher level relations with Taiwan. But the most important thing that the Republicans in Congress can do is actually send a guy named Kevin McCarthy to Taiwan on a visit. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went last August. That was important because it showed American commitment. Yes, the Chinese huffed and puffed, but eventually they didn't do anything. So I think that the Chinese need to see that the Republicans are as committed to Taiwan's defense. And the best way to do that would be for the speaker to make a visit.
So now that's, of course, independent of the committee, but not entirely insofar as if you establish a select committee as step one, and then within weeks or months have the Speaker of the House visit Taiwan as a step two, that really would send quite a message to China, wouldn't it?
It would. And, we got to remember also that in the Senate, Taiwan has a lot of support, especially because one of my senators, Bob Menendez, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, is a big Taiwan supporter, and he has been backing Taiwan legislation. So I hope that there is coordination between Senator Menendez's office and Senator Gallagher and Representative Gallagher's. And I think that is practical right now because they both have the same objective when it comes to Taiwan.
What should this select committee be examining as far as U.S. military preparedness in relationship to China, Gordon?
Well, there's a big issue because the Pentagon wants weapons of the future. And in the present, they are hoping to retire cruisers, F-22s, the most sophisticated fighter in the world, and do other things, which I think is really misguided. Because if China poses a threat to us, which it does, that threat is immediate, and we need to be able to meet it now. Our stores of ammunition are low. Our bases in the region are not hardened. We need to do much more, and especially work much more closely with our friends and allies, South Korea and Japan. Even the Philippines, I think, is starting to understand the danger China poses and is moving much closer to the U.S., despite a lot of rhetoric from the previous president, Rodrigo Duterte. So we are moving in the right direction. The issue is speed, and I hope that the Select Committee just tells the Pentagon, start buying a lot more weapons, because you're going to very well need them now, if not to use them, at least for deterrent purposes.
Just one other question on the specific items as far as focus for this committee, Gordon G. Chang, our guest. Is there anything else that you think they should really be driving home in the course of their work in the coming weeks, months, and really the next couple of years?
One item would be, for instance, legislation cutting technical assistance to China, especially in the biotechnology area. There is reporting in the last couple of days that the Biden administration, which is considering bans on investments, is probably going to take biotechnology away out of the ban, which I think would be the wrong move. We know that the National Institutes of Health, specifically Dr. Fauci's unit,
Yes.
funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology indirectly through that NGO in New York, Eco Health Alliance. Dr. Fauci doesn't want to talk about it, but clearly what he tried to do was to evade a 2014 ban on federal funding of gain-of-function research in the U.S. He outsourced it to China. We know that because there are 2 published papers, by the way, from researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, clearly describing gain-of-function research, and both papers specifically acknowledging funding from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And that is, of course, Dr. Fauci's unit.
Yeah, I mean, there is going to be I think another committee that will examine that as well, but you can't have enough committees looking into the origins of COVID-19. And in this case, going beyond that into what kind of research China is doing into biotechnology, into viruses, so on and so forth. I think it's very important that you brought that up. Again, we're talking with Gordon G. Chang. Follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. When we look at the work of this committee, is there anything that you're worried about? I mean, how concerned are you that maybe they're not going to take this as seriously as they should, that it may end up just being more of let's talk about things and just get experts to come before us and inform us versus taking actions? Because I listening to Mike Gallagher, the congressman from Wisconsin, it really does seem like he's ready to actually take some proactive steps as opposed to just listening to the experts, as it were.
Yeah, Gallagher has talked about the need for bipartisan support, and I understand that. And that, of course, requires time. But we don't need more hearings. There have been tons of hearings. As I mentioned, those 2 congressional bodies have studied China for decades. So we don't need any more of that. What we do need is for Representative Gallagher to talk to people in his caucus and the other caucus to hammer out legislation now, because it is really an issue of time. There is just a lack of sense of urgency in the administration and a lack of sense of urgency in the Pentagon. And that is, I think, the critical failure right now in terms of America's approach to China.
You talk about a lack of a sense of urgency in the Biden administration. I mean, clearly the House, now under Republican control in the majority, is taking this very seriously. What is your assessment so far? We're now 2 years in, just about 2 full years into the Biden presidency. How do you view it?
Well, in terms of China, it hasn't been 100% awful, as it did appear to be in the first couple of weeks of the administration, where they reversed the things that the previous administration had done, which were good. So, for instance, the ban on TikTok and WeChat messaging, also the prohibition on buying electrical grid equipment from China. That ban was reversed on the first day in office. So it looked pretty grim. But since then, the Biden administration's rules in October on chip making and chips, that was an important step forward. The most important thing here is it has been a slow-moving operation on China. And as I mentioned, time is a critical factor. We are going to hear a lot about the Penn Biden Center. It has been known for a long time among China watchers that China has been funding the University of Pennsylvania, especially after the institution of the Penn Biden Center. This is deeply troubling, and I think it is something that the FBI certainly needs to look at, because there are issues that have long preceded the revelations of the last week.
We have seen the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, investing money in various universities and higher education in the United States. And you have students that come that are not just, everyday Chinese, but oftentimes they are affiliated directly with the Chinese Communist Party, maybe children of CCP officials, etc. But when you're talking about the financial piece in particular of donations coming to universities and so forth, how widespread does this seem to be? And going back to the committee, is that an issue you think they should take up?
Yes. For instance, reporting requirements. We know that major universities receive billions of dollars and do not report them, despite the 1986 Education Act requirements. In the Trump administration, when Betsy DeVos was Secretary of Education, she actually got 12 institutions to finally report $6.5 billion in contributions that should have been reported before. So there is, as her department said, pervasive non-compliance of existing rules. And this is a law enforcement priority. It should be. And the committee can actually start to direct funding issues, because the FBI's funding starts at the House of Representatives. These reporting requirements, as I said, need to be a reduced threshold. That $250,000 is much too high. And we know that China has been flooding, as you say, universities with cash. China is not the only offender. Saudi Arabia, Qatar are others, but nonetheless, China is the biggest problem.
Just a few minutes left with our guest, Gordon G. Chang, author of the book, The Great U.S.-China Tech War. The Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, was just in Washington, D.C. on Friday, visited the White House in one of the most significant diplomatic events of the year. Pretty significant, especially given the national security concerns we're talking about vis-a-vis China. Talk to me a little bit about how you view that trip of the Japanese Prime Minister to the White House last week and the significance of the relationship between the United States and Japan, especially vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, I think the trip is actually tomorrow. And it is extremely significant.
That's right. That's right. It didn't just happen. It is happening tomorrow. Right.
Yeah. And it's very important for you to point that out because nobody else is really talking about it. Japan is, as they say, America's cornerstone ally in the region, which it certainly is. And in many ways, it could become America's most important ally, especially as China starts to move against neighbors. Kishida has early in December announced that the government will double defense spending from 1% of gross domestic product to 2% within 5 fiscal years. That's a good move. Also, more important was Kishida said that Japan would no longer consider that counterstrike options would be off the table. In other words, they will start working with the United States in attacking attackers on their home territory. That's important because it allows a lot of joint planning with Japan that up to now has not been possible. So Japan is moving in the right directions. It's trying to establish defense relationships with the UK, with Italy, with just everybody in sight, because the Japanese can see what the Chinese are doing, and they have a sense of urgency, which we do not.
Yeah, I mean, there is an urgency, especially when you are right there. I mean, you're in the thick of it, and you're the one that when missile tests have happened, you've been in the line of sight and so forth. Japan and Taiwan both have been have had very strong concerns over missile tests and other things going on directly in the region. So it makes sense that they have that urgency, and hopefully that will bring more urgency to the Biden administration when they have their meeting tomorrow. Real quickly, Gordon G. Chang, talk to me about South Korea and how things are looking with them, because you've written a book called Losing South Korea, a booklet that Encounter Books published a few years ago, where we had talked in the past about concerns that South Korea may have been going weaker vis-a-vis North Korea, vis-a-vis China. Where do you see them right now, particularly when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, I wrote that book when Moon Jae-in was president, who is basically pro-China, pro-North Korea, anti-U.S., deeply anti-U.S. Fortunately, Moon's candidate for his successor failed. The president of South Korea right now is Yoon Suk-yeol, who is very pro-American. We're moving in the right direction. And by the way, Yoon is also in a panic about China. And so I think that he's going to drop objections and start working with Japan very closely, despite historical animosity, because he realizes you can't defend South Korea if Japan doesn't cooperate.
We will be watching that with great interest in tomorrow's summit with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden in Washington, D.C. at the White House. Gordon G. Chang, follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. It's always great to get your insights, my friend. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thank you, Jimmy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Once again, he's the author of several books, including The Great U.S.-China Tech War. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. We'll pick up the conversation on the other side. Top of the hour, Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman will join us. So keep it right here. Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Where did the first hour go? Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler today. News Talk 710 KNUS. 3 more hours up ahead, including top of the hour. Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman will join us to explain his tie-breaking vote in favor of doing something you don't normally hear happen in a big city like Aurora. The elimination of a tax, specifically the city council, with Mayor Coffman's tie-breaking vote on Monday, voted to repeal the occupational privilege tax in Aurora because it's such a privilege to work in Aurora. I know Denver's got a privilege tax as well. It's just a privilege to work in these cities. Kudos to the Aurora City Council for relieving tax burden on small businesses across the city of Aurora, the state's 3rd largest city and a continuously fast-growing city at that. We will check in with Mayor Coffman on this coming up at the top of the hour. Of course, he was a small business owner for quite some time himself and can speak to that perspective here on the program. Plus, Dave Kopel of the Independence Institute will break down that horribly unconstitutional bill that has just been proposed in the legislature regarding gun control. Truly extreme. I mean, astonishingly so. So that's coming up later on. And we'll also take your calls, 303-696-1971, with much to discuss. Just a quick comment on my conversation with Gordon G. Chang, who's one of my favorite guests going back years. He and I haven't always agreed. For example, we were on opposite ends of the China trade war during the Trump administration, but his insights are fascinating. They are learned, and he is always excellent at explaining his points and breaking things down, and especially when it comes to the national security concerns, is consistently on point. I think this select committee on China is extraordinarily important. And I agree with him that the work of the committee is very likely to be quite serious and to get some things actually done, and that they need to get some things done as far as putting forward legislation for consideration by the full House of Representatives. So Gordon G. Chang is right on that point, and we will see what happens moving forward. But big deal and a good first step that the Republican-controlled House, with broad bipartisan support, has decided to put this together. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. Keep it right here. We've got 3 more hours up ahead on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Time now for the second hour of the George Show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George once again. George Brauchler, that is. Here on News Talk 710 KNUS. He's a little under the weather still, but I'm glad to be here in the saddle for you. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show Saturday mornings from 6 to 9. Right here on 710 KNUS. Coming up a little later on in the program, fallout from yesterday morning's big Federal Aviation Administration issue that shut down, putting it very mildly, that shut down all domestic airline traffic for hours. What is the fallout? What does it mean? What could it spell for Pete Buttigieg, the former South Bend, Indiana mayor, turned presidential candidate, turned Secretary of Transportation in the Biden administration? We'll get to that coming up later on in the program. Right now here in Colorado, we are faced with a slew of new fees going into effect on a range of things, from plastic bags, for crying out loud, which, have you realized how many uses you actually get out of plastic bags? It's been on my mind the past couple of weeks, ever since the 10-cent per bag tax fee, really a tax, went into effect. And I've been like, okay, these bags are very useful in so many different ways. You've got the tax on Uber and Lyft drivers, on Amazon packages, on deliveries from DoorDash and Grubhub, and the list goes on. All these different taxes that have been going on, particularly at the state level or under the guise of fees. But what if I told you that the third largest city in the state of Colorado just had its city council vote to repeal a tax, a head tax on workers in Aurora, something known as the occupational privilege tax? Well, you better believe it, because it's absolutely true. And in fact, the tie-breaking vote to make this happen was cast by the mayor of Aurora, Mayor Mike Coffman, who's kind enough to rejoin us on the program this morning. Mr. Mayor, Happy New Year and welcome back. It's good to talk with you.
Hey, Jimmy, great to be with you.
Great to have you. So first of all, before we get to the specifics of this tax, I want to get to a little bit of background of yourself, because folks know you as former congressman, former secretary of state and treasurer. You were in the state legislature, but you come from a small business background.
Yeah, in the city of Aurora, well, my legacy is kind of military and small business.
Right.
My father was retired Army. Then he went into business. I served in the military, and I went into small business in Aurora. And so, I really understand the challenges of small business, and that if you want to grow the economy, you better have some pro-growth policies to help small businesses out.
So this came up for a vote on Monday in the city council meeting. It was a tie vote of 5-5. You cast the tie-breaking vote. It was 5-5. You cast that tie-breaking vote. What is the tax that you voted to repeal, and why?
Well, it's called the occupational privilege tax, or OPT. That essentially says it is a privilege for you to work in this city, and so you are going to pay a tax for that privilege. And I think if your goal is to create jobs, I don't understand why you want to tax them. If you want less of something, you put a tax on it. And so this will be, there's so much hand wringing that's going on about this. This is essentially $6 million out of a budget that's over $1 billion. And so, and it gives staff, it gives the budgeters plenty of time to figure out where these cuts are going to come from, or simply growing the government less given the growth in revenues. So it doesn't take effect until January of 2025. So it gives plenty of time to move forward. It was initially proposed by Daniel Jurinsky, Councilmember Daniel Jurinsky, put it forward, a small business owner herself in the city of Aurora. And so really proud to have this. And so there is a mechanism whereby if if revenues don't come in, council can always reconsider it. Obviously, my belief is they will come in. We did specify if in fact the revenues aren't there and we need to cut the spending, where that will come from. Then it will not come from public safety. Then it will not come from transportation related spending. Then it will come from other areas of the government, given some discretion to the bureaucrats to make those cuts. So I think that this is the right move, and it's amazing the opposition to this is that this is the end of the world.
Yeah, I don't understand why anybody wouldn't be in favor of repealing this. As Jurinsky is quoted as saying, it's essentially a head tax on businesses and workers in Aurora. And I always have been entertained by the idea, Aurora, Denver, you name it, when there's an occupational privilege tax, it's somehow a privilege to be running a company. It's actually more in a particular city. It's actually, I think, more a privilege for a city like Aurora to host some great businesses like Aurora has right now and continues to develop in a very fast growing city, Mayor Coffman.
Sure, absolutely. And you think about it, it sounds de minimis. $4 a month for, $2 a month for an employee, $2 a month for an employer. But what you have to also understand is people work multiple jobs these days. But there's a lot of people that work multiple jobs and gives them a full-time plus income. And each job actually will be taxed. So it's not like you just pay it once. It's just anything above $250 of gross income. So you've got, teenagers paying this tax. You've got people working multiple jobs paying this tax multiple times. And the, administrative burden of businesses having to comply with it. So it's a bad tax. I'm privileged. I guess if the OPT, occupational privilege tax, I'm privileged to cast a final vote to get rid of this occupational privilege tax.
One thing, in just a couple more minutes, appreciate your time this morning, Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman, our guest. It's not every day that in a large city like Aurora, and it is the third largest city in Colorado, but consistently growing. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't seen the data, but it feels like it's the fastest growing city in the state of Colorado. But when you see a big city like this actually repeal a tax, that's a big deal. That's not something that happens every week.
This is just really for a start. I mean, my view is this. My view is Aurora's going to go in one direction and Denver's down a very different path. And so what I want is for the city of Aurora, Colorado to be the economic alternative to Denver, because Denver never met a tax it didn't love. They have taxes and fees and every year new things go before the voters and they pass them every year. There are new fees imposed. And so I just want to make sure that we're running an efficient government. I want to make sure that we're running a government that increases economic opportunity by growing the economy and not just doing transfer payments to people that aren't working. And so whether we're talking about the issue of homelessness, whether we're talking about the occupational privilege tax, whether we're talking about running an efficient government in terms of fees, we're going to continue to go in a direction that is pro-economic growth, and it's going to lift. It will lift all boats in this city. And so a rising tide is, I think, actually, President Kennedy initially made that statement.
Yeah, when you see what Denver's doing, as you pointed out, with raising taxes and fees, you see it happening at the state level. It is squeezing small businesses, especially all across the state and in those cities. And it is a breath of fresh air, I think, for a place like Aurora to say, you know what, we are going to adopt this provision of repealing the occupational privilege tax or any tax instead of just adding on new ones that we keep seeing. So kudos to you for making that tie-breaking vote, to Danielle Jurinsky, councilwoman, for putting this forward. It's nice to see a good change of pace there in the city of Aurora. Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman, we know you got to run, so thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate you checking in on this.
Jimmy, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you as well, and Happy New Year. Once again, Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman joining us here on the program. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. And it's true. It's not every day that you hear of a tax being repealed. Instead, we're constantly seeing new taxes, new this, new that going into effect, especially this year. And here you have a very different change of pace. A different perspective on governance like this. So if I know from memory the whole list, you got Danielle Jurinsky, who put forward this proposal. And of course, as Mayor Coffman pointed out, she's a small business owner in Aurora. She put it forward. Dustin Zvonek voted for it. Steve Sundberg voted for it. Francoise Bergen voted for it. Curtis Gardner voted for it. And then Mayor Mike Coffman had to break the tie and did cast that tie-breaking vote. The opponents who want to keep the people and businesses of Aurora paying more, who opposed it, who voted no, were council members Ruben Medina, Juan Marcano, Allison Coombs, Angela Lawson, and Crystal Murillo. They all dissented. Look, this is a time where businesses and individuals are paying a lot. Taxes are going up. Fees, so-called, are going up. It's a welcome change of pace indeed. Kudos to the City Council of Aurora for doing this, for actually taking action like this. Like, you don't even hear of this much in general. So I'm sort of like, wow. Very good to hear the conservative-leaning majority on the Aurora City Council is taking proactive steps to grow the economy and not constrain the economy. Not put a "we know better than you" sort of attitude into place. By the way, our telephone number, 303-696-1971. If you'd like to join in to the festivities, we will not have another guest until Dave Kopel of the Independence Institute will join us in the 9 o'clock hour, and he's going to help us understand what this so-called assault weapons ban would actually do and how flagrantly unconstitutional it is. This ban has been proposed in the state house already in the legislature, not wasting any time, and it is as radical and extreme as you can go. Now, on a different topic, I teased I wanted to get into this. Folks, yesterday, what were we talking about here in the morning? The Federal Aviation Administration had a system shutdown where they had to ground all domestic transport, air flights across the country, all of them, for several hours. And there's still questions as to what actually caused this. And in fact, Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation yesterday, was still not very clear on the cause.
This is one of the reasons why we need to get these answers and have this review of exactly what happened, because we need to understand whether this reflects a systemic issue and what would be required so that there's no single point of failure here. Again, there need to be redundancies and layers and layers of protection here. This is an incredibly complex system, so glitches or complications happen all the time, but we can't allow them to ever lead to this level of disruption.
But he still hasn't figured out exactly what caused this level of disruption. What is he doing to fix it? What has he done in the past couple of years in terms of taking any sorts of actions here? Then there's the question of whether or not it was a cyber attack. Now, initially, they seemed to kind of rule it out, but then they did. Now, it doesn't seem like it has the markers. Billy and I talked about this yesterday of a cyber attack, but the way in which they're approaching this still raises that question. Here is first Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday, White House press secretary, and then Pete Buttigieg, again, transportation secretary, on this prospect of a cyber attack.
You heard directly from the president on the South Lawn this morning for yourselves. As we shared this morning as well, we do not have evidence that this outage was caused by a cyber attack. The FAA is working aggressively to get to the bottom of the root causes for the system outage so that it does not happen again.
Are we absolutely positive this was not the result of any nefarious activity, either domestic or foreign?
We're not prepared to rule that out. There hasn't been any indication of that. FBI has spoken to this, and of course, FAA is looking closely at that as well as they work to see exactly what was going on inside the files that were in this system leading to this irregularity. So again, what I would say is there is no direct indication of any kind of external or nefarious activity, but we're not yet prepared to rule that out.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You take some time sometimes to ascertain these things, but it does seem like they have to do some sort of reevaluation of the system that they have in place and really make sure that it is not so vulnerable potentially to external threats or even to a kind of glitch, if that's what it is, that led to the first shutdown of the entire domestic air transport system of all domestic flights since 9/11. It's stunning. Now, what's also striking is, and 303-696-1971, let me know what you think, but Pete Buttigieg keeps being plagued with problems. I've never heard so much about a Secretary of Transportation as we have in the past really year of Pete Buttigieg. And so does the president still have confidence? Should the American people have confidence? Should he remain in that post?
Does President Biden have confidence in Transportation Secretary Buttigieg?
Yes.
Why?
Because Secretary Buttigieg he respects the secretary and the work that he has been doing. You have seen the secretary on TV. You have probably spoken to him yourself, and they are doing everything that they can to make sure that the experience that Americans have is a good one.
It's not just about airlines. It's about the other transportation issues that we have seen, the ports and what's happened at ports, and the list goes on. So much to look at that makes you think, okay, this guy is either asleep at the wheel, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's in over his head, whatever it is. And you know that it was sort of a token appointment for somebody who ran for president, who has a good profile and was sort of being rewarded. And yet this position of transportation secretary is one that clearly needs somebody who could do the job, and I just don't see that he's capable of doing the job. What do you think? 303-696-1971. Text coming in, by the way, saying it was a cyber attack. We cannot draw that conclusion. I mean, if there's little tidbits that you think draw that conclusion, I'd be curious what your proof is, because that is... they're saying, well, we don't have any evidence. If there's a fact pattern, if there's proof that you got, please do send it my way, because I'm entirely open to the possibility that this is a cyber attack. Look at what happened yesterday and how it grounded all of these domestic flights, and hundreds, thousands, I think, of flights were canceled yesterday. And we already have seen airlines, well, there's the phrase again, plagued with problems. All sorts of issues going on with the airlines, and then this happens? Is it possible? Yes. Is there any evidence for it? I don't know. Send it my way. 710KNUS app on your smartphone, or give us a call, 303-696-1971. Whether it was a cyber attack, whether it was a glitch, whatever it is, we need a definitive answer, and we need to have a better understanding of what the Department of Transportation is actually doing about it? What steps are they taking? How could this happen if it was or it wasn't a cyber attack? No matter what the cause was, why can't they even identify what the root cause was at this point? Alexa texting in, after all the lies of this administration, I would not believe anything they say. They tell us the border is closed and the economy is great. Fair enough on those 2 points. I think this is one where they'd have to be more transparent if they conclude, yes, there was a cyber attack or whatever this issue or that issue was that caused this. Whatever it is. This is one where they have to ultimately, I think, give an answer because there's a concrete answer. They can spin the border. They can spin the economy. You can't really spin whether or not a cyber attack is the cause of grounded air transportation. Now, yeah, multiple texters are pointing out about Air Traffic Canada subsequently having the kind of problem that the FAA had and wondering about it being a coincidence. In fact, it was a cyber attacks texter noting it's an informed opinion. Check out the Canadian attack. Yeah, I'm aware of that, just not the extent to which it's similar. I'm going to double check that during the break, but it is certainly plausible. And they can't rule it out because they don't know one way or the other, and they need an answer. Another text. Buttigieg uses military aircraft to fly to Europe with his husband for a game. That alone should cost him his gig. You know, he has been using a lot of private flights and so forth in ways that you should not be using those taxpayer dollars. Plain and simple. I mean, look, if anybody needs to be fired from the Biden administration, it's definitely, well, other than Biden or Harris, but they can't be fired. It's definitely Alejandro Mayorkas, number one, from the southern border, Homeland Security Secretary, and number two, Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation. They both should go and be replaced by people who are competent and taking these issues seriously. Come on, guys. Get with the program. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number if you want to join into the festivities. We'll pick up on the conversation about Buttigieg and the FAA, the grounding of flights, cyber attack, and more coming up on the other side. Plus, blues rock lost an icon yesterday in the legendary Jeff Beck. We will talk about and remember the life and legacy of Jeff Beck coming up as well. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. You're listening to News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler this morning. News Talk 710 KNUS. Talking a little bit about the FAA issues yesterday that grounded all domestic flights in the United States. Should Biden have confidence in Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation?
Does President Biden have confidence in Transportation Secretary Buttigieg?
Yes.
Why?
Because Secretary Buttigieg he respects the secretary and the work that he has been doing. You have seen the secretary on TV. You have probably spoken to him yourself, and they are doing everything that they can to make sure that the experience that Americans have is a good one.
A good one? When has the transportation system in the last couple of years under Pete Buttigieg been a good one? By the way, if it does require upgrades, if the problem is that we need to upgrade the systems, why isn't Pete Buttigieg making the case? And for that matter, we're conservatives. We want lower taxes. We want smaller government. But this transportation infrastructure is, of course, one of the fundamental roles of government, particularly in contemporary society. In fact, it has national security implications. This is why Eisenhower built the U.S. highway system back in the 50s, was because we were in the midst of the Cold War and we needed to be able to transport materials, goods, and people much more easily. It was the constitutional basis, really, for the U.S. highway system. Similarly, that's why you need to have the feds controlling, overseeing air traffic. That is viable. It is important. It is necessary for the feds. It's one of the few roles that the federal government needs to be responsible for. So are you willing to pay for more upgrades to the transportation system, particularly for air traffic control? Now, hopefully, the infrastructure bill that they passed back in 2021 was at least somewhat providing funds for this effort, but I don't recall the extent to which it is. But that is a question. But neither here nor there. Here's the one that was coming up in the last segment. Listeners texting in, cyber attack. Well, this is what the administration says about that.
You heard directly from the president on the South Lawn this morning for yourselves. As we shared this morning as well, we do not have evidence that this outage was caused by a cyber attack. The FAA is working aggressively to get to the bottom of the root causes for the system outage so that it does not happen again.
Are we absolutely positive this was not the result of any nefarious activity, either domestic or foreign?
We're not prepared to rule that out. There hasn't been any indication of that. FBI has spoken to this, and of course, FAA is looking closely at that as well as they work to see exactly what was going on inside the files that were in this system leading to this irregularity. So again, what I would say is there is no direct indication of any kind of external or nefarious activity, but we're not yet prepared to rule that out.
The outage was of the FAA's Notice to Air missions system, which sends pilots vital information they need to fly. This was the result of a corrupted file that, as NBC News reported, affected both the primary and the backup systems, according to a senior government official last night, adding that they are continuing to investigate. Well, a similar issue was, as listeners have been texting, pointing out, reminding us, was or took place in Canada yesterday with their own NOTAM entry system. And that was out for a few hours. Now, their spokesperson for the nonprofit organization based in Ottawa said that NAV Canada was still investigating the root cause of the failure as of Wednesday afternoon, but said she didn't believe the cause was related to the Federal Aviation Administration NOTAM system outage earlier in the day. They don't believe that. Now, I don't know. You don't know. We don't know. I can understand why people would wonder and ask the question, oh, is this a cyber attack, or conclude, there's a good chance that it is. It's entirely possible. But here's the thing. You can't jump to that kind of conclusion without evidence or a basis that is beyond what we're seeing vis-a-vis United States and Canada. One could say, oh, well, obviously. No, you got to bring more to the table than just that, which maybe you have. Maybe you have specific reasons behind drawing that conclusion. Call in 303-696-1971 or text into the show on the 710KNUS app. But I'm not going to draw some conclusion, oh my gosh, this was a cyber attack, without any real knowledge of the specifics, the technicality, etc. Is it possible? Again, yes. But that's neither here nor there as to whether or not Pete Buttigieg should stay as transportation secretary, whether or not this is a significant issue. It may be a cyber attack issue. It may be just systems that are outdated. Whatever the cause is, there's a problem here, and it has to be resolved. Now, will that problem be solved by having a more competent Secretary of Transportation? Well, it certainly would help. It certainly would help. But maybe more money needs to go to upgrading these systems. Text coming in. The only good thing about Pete being the Secretary of Education is I believe every day he silently chants, I hate this job. I hate this job. He probably accepted it thinking he could skate by having the people below him doing actual work. Not surprising he is so awful. As mayor of a small town, he could not even get potholes handled. Here is a concept. Hire people who are actually competent and can perform the job. Amen. Also, another text. Jimmy, if the taxpayers in Colorado and the United States don't like the way this country is being handled, then they need to stop voting for Democrats. Colorado whines about the price of a plastic bag. They should have done something about Polis when they had the chance and they blew it. It's more important for them to keep their marijuana, their mushrooms, and their homeless, I guess. I think we've seen that very few of these Democrats qualified for the jobs that you can start with the president. Jobs they have, you can start with president. Well, that goes to Pete Buttigieg specifically right there, that he ran for president, and then you find out, oh, well, he's actually not very well up to the jobs that are before him, whether that was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, or secretary of transportation. As to the point about Democrats and voting, look, I think Coloradans who did vote against Polis et al. Have every right to complain and to gripe about it. Not necessarily so much those who did. But yours truly, I'm definitely going to be speaking about it. It's a real pain. And it's frustrating to have these nanny staters in charge, despite my best efforts and yours to vote the bums out. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. If you want to join into the festivities, keep the texts coming. We will get to one that came in about Jeff Beck coming up a little later in the program as well. But what do you think? Should Pete Buttigieg stay? Is he as incompetent as he seems? What do you make of it? And do you have evidence more than just something similar happened between the United States and Canada that justifies calling it a cyber attack, what happened yesterday? Also, Biden, a second batch of classified documents was uncovered by his lawyers. So they say. What happened? Are there more? Will there be more? What are your expectations? 303-696-1971. And you can text into the show on the 710KNUS app. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. Got to take a break. We'll be back on the other side. Denver's local talk leader, News Talk, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
10 minutes to 8 o'clock. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Thanks for joining us. 44 degrees. Looks like that's going to be the high today or thereabouts in the Denver metro area. Let's call it low 40s. It doesn't look like we got snow in the forecast. Partly cloudy. We'll see what happens with the weather. Actually, mostly sunny. That's a little better than partly cloudy, or is that the same as partly cloudy? I don't know. Sometimes the weather terminology gets a little confusing. 303-696-1971. Pete Buttigieg is the Secretary of Transportation. And gosh, he seems to have a heck of a lot of problems going on. Let's continue the conversation with John, who joins us now. Good morning, John. How are you?
Good morning, Jimmy. I'm doing quite well. Thank you.
Good to have you. What's on your mind?
Well, wanted to talk about the NOTAMs and give you a little background information if you'd like.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Notice to Air Missions. That's a new name. It used to be Notice to Airmen, but that was changed in the last 24 months.
Okay.
The NOTAM system provides several types of information to aviators. It provides airport conditions. For example, the relative slickness of a runway, whether it's wet or ice covered. It also covers communication at airports, for example, or it could also include and does include information on radio navigation. And these NOTAMs are published on an as-needed basis and have different time fuses that they're in effect for.
Right. By the way, John, just for background, because you and I know each other, you are a pilot, right?
Yes, sir. A commercial aviator for
Okay.
10 years.
Okay. So just to give you a little bit of, so you know what you're talking about. So what do you make of the outages yesterday?
That's a big outage. It really disrupted the transportation system, as you know. No real comment on the outage source itself, although it's extremely unusual to have NAV Canada go down at approximately the same time.
I think it was just shortly thereafter, but yeah, I mean, close enough in that regard. I mean, do you agree with me that we need to see more before one can truly draw a conclusion that there was something nefarious going on?
Not only from that standpoint, but I think we need more information before people can conclusively say that there wasn't anything nefarious.
Fair enough. I think that's very important, especially when it is possible that something could have been up. And that is why I do think it's acceptable for the Biden administration to say, well, we're not entirely sure yet. Do your investigation. But gosh, it would be nice to get this resolved pretty quickly, at least to find out what the problem was, so then we can figure out what the solution needs to be, John.
Absolutely. This is it's a somewhat, I don't know if I can say very complex system. It's a database and essentially a fancy spreadsheet of information that is generated on a location basis.
Hey.
Yes.
Very informative call, John. I got to run, but I appreciate it. Thank you, my friend.
Have a great day, sir.
You as well. John's line is open, 303-696-1971. Let's go to Brian in Arvada. Good morning, Brian. What's going on?
Hey, Jimmy. How's it going?
Going fine. What's up?
Well, my friend's mom worked for United for 20 plus years, and she retired. She said these systems rarely go down without a warning. With if it's outdated system, there's warning signs where, okay, this system's starting to fail. These glitches are very rare that just boom, it's a glitch. And so I'm not going to make any presumptions, and neither is she, but it said that is very rare for an outdated system not to show signs and just all of a sudden go out.
So that's entirely reasonable, but it is also entirely reasonable to think that those alarms could have been sort of going off or giving some kind of signals, but they're completely unattended to. We are talking about the federal government here.
Well, you're right. Your bureaucracy, of course, and my other point is, first of all, the press secretary is totally out of her league. I mean, she never said an intelligent sentence that she didn't read verbatim. Take a public speaking 101 course and actually, go over your notes so you're not reading a statement that makes us feel all at ease, because that statement didn't make me feel at ease. And then she said the reason we should have that the president has confidence in Buttigieg is because we've seen him on TV, and because Ducey's talked to him in the hallway, and because he hopes we all have a good experience traveling, like those. And he said, why? Now it's how. So she's I can't even listen to her, but that's what we have. But to my next point is, that's what we have for Buttigieg, someone who's not qualified to be in that position. It's a token position because he ran for president. And here we are. We need to get to the bottom of this, because this is a major, look how many people fly. We're flying in April. God forbid something happens in the air. I hope these pilots can fly instrument free. My father-in-law was a small engine pilot. He had to learn that he had to get his instrument free license, training. I don't know, but if we're getting grounded, something's going on, Jimmy. And Buttigieg isn't the guy he has no transportation experience.
Well, here's
so
the
why
thing.
He's in charge of getting to the bottom of this?
That's very true. Brian, I appreciate the call. Those are very important questions. I would like to think that we'll get things sorted out. But is Buttigieg the guy to do it? I don't think so there. We'll pick up the conversation in the next hour. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. KNUS, stay with us. Good morning. Hour number 3. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you, filling in for George Brauchler, who's still a little under the weather. Happy to be here in the saddle for him today. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show every Saturday morning from 6 to 9 right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. If you want to join in to the festivities, you can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. And I'm on Twitter 24/7, 365 at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And a couple ways to email me, the Jimmy Sengenberger Show page, 710knus.com, or log on to my website, jimmysengenberger.com, and go to the contact page there. Remember, it's all E's all the time in Sengenberger. Let's take a little bit of a break from politics for a few minutes to remember an icon in music who passed away yesterday at the age of 78. That would be none other than Jeff Beck. Absolutely incredible. Jeff Beck, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, longtime solo musician, former Yardbird guitarist, one of the three. Him, Jimmy Page, and Eric Clapton, of course, were the three at various points. Passed away yesterday at the age of 78 after a short, brief bout with bacterial meningitis, leaving behind an incredible legacy. Jeff Beck, as Rolling Stone puts it, the blues rock innovator and two-time Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee who revolutionized how the guitar is played, died Tuesday at the age of 78. Beck's family confirmed the former Yardbirds guitarist death Wednesday. Quote, On behalf of his family, it is with deep and profound sadness that we share the news of Jeff Beck's passing, his family said in a statement. After suddenly contracting bacterial meningitis, he peacefully passed away yesterday. His family asked for privacy while they process this tremendous loss. Beck is an 8-time Grammy winner, was twice inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, both as a member of the Yardbirds as well as for his work with his own Jeff Beck group. Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page, Beck's Yardbirds bandmate, who inducted the guitarist into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, wrote on social media, "The six-stringed warrior is no longer here for us to admire the spell he could weave around our mortal emotions. Jeff could channel music from the ethereal. His technique, unique. His imagination's apparently limitless. Jeff, I will miss you along with your millions of fans. Jeff Beck, rest in peace." And of course, the memorials kept pouring in from all sorts of musicians because of the legacy here. Just listen to that playing. Billy, how about this? How about Jeff Beck and what he leaves behind?
This hurts. This hurt a lot yesterday. Heard middle of the afternoon, hear that he is gone, and it was a gut punch. Because of, for me, what he means inside of the genre. At the core, he's a blues guitarist, but he approached the instrument uniquely. Jeff Beck, I forgot what interview it is, talked about the fact that he viewed the guitar like a lead singer. The lead guitar was supposed to be a secondary singer for the band. It was supposed to be able to reach out and provide emotion, provide tenor, provide pacing for the song. It was supposed to do things the lead singer couldn't. And he said he was always trying to explore sounds that singers would be able to do on air that he could do with his guitar. And I forget the model, but his preferred model is a Stratocaster. And he likes it because it has a spring-loaded bridge and allows him to pitch the notes up and down. And he said that was a revelation to know that I could play with this little whammy bar, but he said it's really a vibrato bar. And I could play with that, and I could make these noises go up and down and up and down. And he said it was just unbelievable for him when he discovered that. He is a stud because, listen, this is the dude that they came to and said, "Hi, you want to replace Eric Clapton?" Really?
Right.
I mean,
well, and
in
fact,
wow.
Eric Clapton said he was leaving the Yardbirds, and he went to Jimmy Page and said, "Hey, Jimmy, you want to replace me?" And he said, "Nah, I'm going to pass, but I recommend Jeff Beck." Yeah. And so Beck took over, and then eventually Page joined the band just months later on bass, and then became a second guitarist along with Beck.
Think about it, because Page starts with the Yardbirds as the bassist, and then switched that second guitar, and then they released the 1996, it's 95 or 96 album, which is unbelievable because of the dual guitars. And oddly enough, that's the only album Jeff Beck is on. That's it, because they get mad at him. He's very prickly. Everybody that works with him says that he has this amazing talent. Yeah, but also a wee bit.
By the way, you accidentally said 96 was 66.
Oh yeah, 66.
1966.
Right.
And
right.
yes, you're right.
But it was the only one, and he was prickly, and so they kick him out. In fact, one of my favorite quotes from him is when they talk about him being inducted to the Hall of Fame with the Yardbirds, and he says, "Well, everybody's telling me that I should be extremely proud today, but I'm not. I'm kind of mad because they kicked me out of the band. So F them," which I look at and go, dude, I mean, that is a long time to hold a grudge over this. He was incredible. And again, you talked about the Jeff Beck group. That's lead singer Rod Stewart with Ron Wood on bass. That is nuts to think about. That is a super group today. I mean, he even went on afterwards and contributed many things. Everybody knows John Bon Jovi's first solo hit, Blaze of Glory, guitarist Jeff Beck. So there are those things that he did. It's just amazing.
He leaves behind such a legacy and so many influences, and the collaborations that he did. The Fire and Fury tour, my dad went to that in the 80s.
Oh wow!
Where he toured with Stevie Ray Vaughan. Absolutely incredible, and how they played together and did a bunch of different tunes. I mean, it was a powerhouse duo right there. I'm so jealous because I love Stevie's my favorite, and Jeff Beck. You put them together, and man, it's just you watch videos or listen to audio of that, and it's absolutely incredible. Now I have a little bit of fun. Jimmy Sengenberger music trivia for you about this, and there's a slight little bit of embarrassment, but not really because I was 7. So the very first concert I ever saw, we were living in New Jersey at the time. My dad took me. Johnny Lang opened for Jeff Beck.
Oh, wow.
I was 7 years old and saw Jeff Beck in concert, at least for a little bit, until it got too loud for 7-year-old Jimmy, who then made Dad take us home. Now,
that's funny.
If
I was your dad, I would hold that over.
Well, he was very nice, but you know what? In my defense, I was 7, and we would go on in my teen and adult years to see Jeff Beck a couple more times together, including one several years ago. And I'm going to play a little bit of from this tour coming up on Saturday on my show. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jeff Beck with Rick French, who is on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He should be joining me on Saturday. But he and Buddy Guy went on tour together, and it was absolutely an incredible show. It was at Fiddler's Green. I think Buddy was first and then Jeff Beck, and it was phenomenal. But the different musicians that he was friends with, that he would play with, that respected him, that showed that right now you can see all the love, the admiration, the support, Billy, that is being shared glowingly upon Jeff Beck. It shows two things. One, his musical prowess was respected, but also the kind of guy he was. He wasn't a singer, so you didn't really hear his voice unless you listened to him do an interview, but you can tell the measure of a man by the things people say about him when he passes away.
Yeah, I believe that Jeff Beck is one of probably 2 to 3 people that's responsible for the psychedelic turn and the direction 70s rock goes. I believe he was on the forefront of that as far as experimenting with what the guitar could do and what the sounds were. Yesterday, I read a wonderful story from Aerosmith. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry are talking about how they're out on tour and Joe Beck is with them as well. And he's, I believe he's opening up for him or they're opening for him. I don't remember which it is, but he's doing sound check. And they were like, no, we're not sitting backstage. We're not going to be back we're going to come and watch this.
Right.
And the photographer at the time has a picture where the photographer is standing behind Steven Tyler and Joe Perry off stage in the back, and they're staring, watching Jeff Beck do the sound check. And they say it's a picture that makes them look like they're both 5-year-old kids because they're like, oh. And Steven Tyler told the story that he remembers that incident because he and Joe Perry are standing there and they keep elbowing each other going, do you hear what he just did?
Yeah.
Did you hear the lick that he just had? Oh my God, he just did that with that note. Oh my, that chord. Did you hear that chord? But they said it was a gift to them because they could see that even though Jeff Beck was so accomplished, what he still was doing was experimenting, learning, and having fun.
So when Rolling Stone calls him a blues rock innovator, that term is so apt. Yes, I got a listener text earlier that said, Jeff Beck is not blues rock. I'm sorry, he is. Did he do a lot of straight rock? Yeah. Absolutely. But you go to the Yardbirds, he was arguably the bluesiest. His short tenure, but arguably the bluesiest sounding of the guitarists of the Yardbirds. But also when he would play with Stevie Ray or Buddy Guy or you name it, or just his own songs, you can hear those blues roots. Oftentimes it is the blues, and a lot of times it's guitar virtuoso playing for sure. Yeah. But innovator is really such an apt word, Billy, because he was so creative, so ingenious in what he would do with the whammy bar and with other techniques, not to mention his raw skills as a guitarist.
Yeah, his basic licks were all blues based, his chords and the progressions. But then he stretched out and figured, okay, what can I do with this guitar? What do I have the ability to stretch the limits of what people are doing? And again, I come back to what we talked about right at the beginning, that he viewed that guitar as a secondary singer, that guitar is as important, that lead guitar, as the singer up front because it drives the music. And so he was trying to figure out, okay, how do I play a duet with this vocal. And the instrumental that you played earlier, if you just sit back and listen, his guitar is singing. Every single note, it is singing. He was just, oh my gosh, it is difficult to talk about because it is a huge loss for me.
You know, I am so glad that I was able to go see him a couple of times because he's one of those, well, really 3 times. It is amazing. Yes, we left early. But how many people do you know who can say they were 7 when they saw Jeff Beck as their very first concert?
That's true.
Like, that is pretty cool. But being able to see him multiple times and have that experience is something else because he is such a legend. It's like going to see Greg Allman and the Allman Brothers play. You know, I got to do that 2 times for me. I was in middle school and high school and absolutely loved it. And when you have those memories of Buddy Guy or B.B. King, the people that you see who are really those influential music icons, it leaves something in your soul that will never go away, Bill.
Oh, yeah, it really does. And I spent a little bit of time yesterday with Beck's last concert performance, which was late last year. And he was performing with, of all people, Johnny Depp. He was in Johnny Depp's band, which I always was like,
really?
How did Johnny pull that off? Yeah.
Whoa.
Like, he was a lead guitarist in that band. I'm like, how did
I didn't even know Johnny Depp had a band.
I know. Yeah, most people don't. And for good reason. They're not that good. But Jeff Beck's amazing. I mean, you listen to it and you're like, the guitarist is great. Everybody else, meh. But yeah, I just was always fascinated with the how is that conversation? I keep thinking of that. It always fascinated me because, it's Johnny Depp. So if Johnny Depp calls you, yeah, you take Johnny's call. But you're Jeff Beck. You played with the Yardbirds. You played with Roger Waters, John Bon Jovi. You've been on the album with Kate Bush. Jimmy Page looks up to you. Rod Stewart and Ron Wood were in your band. You weren't in their band. They were in your band. And Johnny Depp calls up and goes, dude, you want to be in my band? I'm like, how does that conversation go? I'm just curious. I'm like, I can't understand that Jeff Beck didn't say,
that's hilarious.
We should call the Jeff
Did you
Beck
ever
group.
get to see Jeff?
No, I did not.
No, you missed out.
There are a number of those that hurt that I missed. The other one that really hurts is not seeing Nirvana. I had a couple of chances and did not. And that hurts because I didn't think that their career was going to be so short. Jeff Beck, I have really no good excuse for not going and seeing because he had such a long career.
Right.
And it just was one of those that I'll see him next time. And not understanding that sometimes, your heroes die.
Well, Buddy Guy's doing his farewell tour. I'm waiting for the Colorado date or dates to be set because I haven't seen him in years. And I told my dad, we got to go see Buddy Guy. He's doing his farewell tour. You don't want to miss out on those kinds of opportunities. And by the way, he's got a long career ahead of him, but Bill, you still need to go to Red Rocks and see Joe Bonamassa.
Yeah, I do.
Just saying, brother.
The other one that's kicking me right now is NoFX, which is kind of a punkish grant band, is doing a farewell tour, and they're promising to play 40 songs at night. So I might just have to break down and go see them.
Yes.
I've seen them a number of times. I'd love to see them.
Do it for sure. But just a final thought from you, and then I'll give my final thought on Jeff Beck. What is his legacy?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, his legacy is being unafraid. It's understanding that you can take that instrument and stretch it. Try to figure out where you can go and don't be limited by the notes that are on the page. Only be limited by the notes that are inside of you. That's probably it.
I think that's very well put. And if you look at his style, you look at the way that he would play, you're absolutely right. And I think his legacy is also in the musicians that he influenced. I mean, the incredible number and his contemporaries too. When you have, as you pointed out, Jimmy Page say, just marveling at the technical prowess, the skill, the power, the raw emotions of Jeff Beck, there's something really there that is worth celebrating, worth recognizing. And the list goes on. I mean, I was seeing Buddy Guy paid tribute and Jimmy Vaughn and just everybody, you name them, in terms of the rock and blues worlds. They acknowledged and just took a moment to say, rest in peace, brother. We'll miss you. And thanks for everything.
There was a picture yesterday on social media of Ozzy Osbourne and Jeff Beck. And I'm like, oh, that would have been a lot of fun. That would have been really fun to see. Because again, one of the recent singles that Ozzy released, Jeff Beck actually played lead guitar on it. So that would have been really, really fun because for me, Ozzy's heyday is really Randy Rhoads. And I think Jeff Beck is the only one that would have come close to replicating that kind of energy that Rhoads brought to a track. And they did in this most recent single. But yeah, that was one that I'm just looking at going, oh, that's scary to think of those two guys together.
Yeah, it's something else. And so many of those collaborations, I am jealous of everybody who saw the Fire and Fury tour of Jeff Beck and Stevie Ray Vaughan together. Absolutely out of this world. May Jeff Beck rest in peace. Thanks for your incredible contributions. Again, the legend himself passed away yesterday at the age of 78 after a bout with bacterial meningitis. I'll talk a little bit more about Jeff Beck on Saturday. Should be joined by a member of the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Rick French, to talk about his legacy. Keep it right here. We'll get back to politics on the other side. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Good to be with you. Thanks for joining us and also for indulging Billy and I and paying a little homage to the great late Jeff Beck. Passed away again at the age of 78 just yesterday. So apparently I'm seeing here Fox News reporting that the second batch of Biden documents, the classified documents, was found in a garage in Wilmington, Delaware. I mean, what? In a garage? Or are we? Yeah, Wilmington, Delaware. I was just checking because North Carolina came up. In a garage. Whether you're talking Trump or you're talking Biden, what are the protocols that are in place for tracking these kinds of documents during transitions? The Trump campaign and Trump legal team have not put forward any sort of tracking mechanism, any documentation for how or why they were moved. Classified documents were, they sort of say declassified, but haven't put forward evidence of declassified, that they were actually declassified. But they haven't provided any sort of tracking from getting, say, to Mar-a-Lago from the White House. Biden isn't providing that in his case. Now, in both of those instances, how come there's no tracking? How come there's no accountability? How come it's so easy to take these documents like that? And we've heard of instances with Hillary Clinton and Obama similarly. What the hell's going on here? How is it so easy? And why isn't there a better system in place for, at the very least, tracking what happens with these documents when a president or a vice president leaves office? Coming up in the next hour, we will talk in part about this with David Harsanyi of the Federalist. He'll join us to break down some of the political implications of this and more coming up in the next hour. We'll also be joined, by the way, by David Kopel of the Independence Institute to talk about this outrageous gun control bill, this so-called assault weapons ban that is as broad as you could really get, as broad as you could possibly get. And it's terrible. We'll talk about it and the constitutionality or lack thereof with David Kopel coming up later. Listener text coming in. Jimmy, stop comparing the two. Trump was president. Biden was vice president at the time. Here's the extent to which I agree with that distinction. There certainly seems to me to be more latitude between the president and vice president a little bit in terms of some of these determinations. But at the same time, we are talking about, in the Trump case, there is no tracking and documentation saying these were declassified. They have not provided it. If it exists, the legal team has not provided it. So it's one thing to say, oh, the president has the right to declassify documents. You need to also provide that declassification. It's harder to make that distinction if you're not providing that sort of evidence. The Trump legal team, even during their negotiations with the FBI, with the authorities, with the archives, never actually asserted declassification. So that's where the comparison becomes a little bit more like there's not as much of a distinction. Because if they were declassified, number one, why wasn't that claimed? And number two, why wasn't there tracking? Number three, why isn't there substantiation of it? Rather than just after the fact saying, oh, well, I considered it declassified. My point is more that it is stunning that you have these documents that are just showing up like this, classified documents. But let's be real. Joe Biden, I mean, he's been blasting Trump. For example, take a listen to this last year.
When you saw the photograph of the top secret documents laid out on the floor at Mar-a-Lago, what did you think to yourself, looking at that image?
How that could possibly happen, how anyone could be that irresponsible. And I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that, I mean names of people who helped, or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
What? By the way, a little bit of clarity here. And when I say what, I mean what? You apply that standard to Trump, but what about yourself and your irresponsibility? So now the headline here is that the classified documents were found at Biden's Wilmington home. So his home and his office at the University of Pennsylvania, where else? He's lost credibility vis-a-vis going after Donald Trump. There is cause. If you're going to apply, Merrick Garland, any kind of a special counsel to look into these matters of Donald Trump, you need to do the same thing for Joe Biden here, especially because Biden is actually the sitting president of the United States. If Biden is the president of the United States, that standard becomes even more significant because he's the current occupier of the office. And now you have these things randomly showing up. The media is even all upset about this and grilling Karine Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, about it. I played this clip earlier, CBS's Ed O'Keefe pressing Jean-Pierre on why it was not until now that we finally found out about this, when it goes back to November of last year, November 2nd, that the documents of the University of Pennsylvania were uncovered.
On like day 2 of this administration, when he swore all of you in, the president said, quote, I'm going to make mistakes. When I make them, I'll acknowledge them and I'll tell you, and I'll need your help to help me correct them. So you're the one here talking to us about this. That's why we're asking you. So let's just remember that.
We don't need to have this. We work very well together. We don't need to have this kind of confrontation. Ask your question and I will answer them the best that I can.
Part of the reason we're
Give some
laying that out is
half-decent
because you're laying
answers.
out your part of the job.
I know, but I'm just saying that we don't need to have contention. You don't need to be contentious with me here, Ed.
The president was asked yesterday, but did not answer this part of the question. Why didn't he or someone in the White House inform the American people when these documents were discovered on November 2nd? Did it have anything to do, because people are asking this part of it, did it have anything to do with the fact that the election was just a few days away?
Again, Ed, this is under review by the Department of Justice. It is literally under review right now. As I am talking to you, it is under review. So I'm not going to get beyond the process. I'm not going to get beyond what the president said.
Oh my goodness. Well, can she at least explain why the lawyers were looking through his private office in the first place?
I just asked if you have any information about why the president's personal attorneys were at the Penn Biden Center in the first place. Were they looking for something specific? Was there something specific they were doing going through these documents? It just seems like to send, if it was just routine moving stuff, to send a personal attorney to do that.
I would refer you to the White House counsel's very extensive kind of information on Monday that they provided. So I refer you to that.
Are there more documents?
There are no assurances you can provide at this point that there are no other classified documents out there in any other office and or home.
Again, this is an ongoing process, so I'm going to let the process continue. It is being reviewed by the Department of Justice, and I'm just going to leave it there.
Well, we now know where the second batch of documents was found. Sounds like his garage at his home. I mean, goodness. Attorney General Merrick Garland will be making a statement today at 1:15 Eastern Time, 11:15 Mountain Time. One would like to think that he is going to appoint some kind of special counsel to look into this. But this is not a small deal, especially when Biden is trying to go. I mean, what you have to be equal here in what you do. Biden needs to be held responsible for his own failures. How the hell do these documents just come up at these places like this? The University of Pennsylvania one, that is stunning. This is absurd. And then this is the kind of explanation that Biden gives.
But I don't know what's in the documents. My lawyers have not suggested I ask what documents they were.
They're yours.
I've turned over the boxes. They've turned over the boxes to the archives, and we're cooperating fully with the review, and which I hope will be finished soon, and there'll be more detail at that time.
Washington University law professor called that unintelligible.
And what the president said yesterday was really rather unintelligible in the sense of, he said, you know, the lawyers told me not to ask what the documents were. Well, I can understand a lawyer saying don't say anything because there's a potential criminal investigation. But there are two steps to this investigation. One is to secure the documents, which has occurred. And the second is to determine if there was any breach of security. For that, you need to know who saw the documents. And the chief witness is the president. You have to ask him, here are the documents in the box. Do you remember asking for these, working off these, showing these? The president just said I was briefed, but told not to ask what the documents are.
I mean, come on. This is ridiculous. Like, genuinely ridiculous, genuinely absurd. And the excuses just keep coming. Somehow Biden was surprised at the documents at the University of Pennsylvania.
He had a closet with
His
classified
lawyers
information in
did
it
the
that they
right
found. How did it get
again.
Did the
He
lawyers
did.
do
He
the
was
right thing?
surprised that the records were there. He spoke to this
But they were
personally.
there.
He was surprised that the records were there.
I mean, my goodness. All right. President Biden is speaking now on classified documents.
That's down from 7.1%.
Let's listen in via CBS.
It's down from 9.1% this summer. Inflation is now at its lowest level since October of 2021. When we look at just the last 3 months, we see that inflation fell to 1.8% on an annualized basis. It's down from more than 11% in the first 3 months of last year. So the data is clear.
Of course,
Even though inflation
Biden is
high,
trying to tout a successful economic agenda as he leads into the remarks on classified documents that are pretty damning for him. We'll listen in for a couple of minutes on 710 KNUS.
to get oil onto the market and bring down prices. Now gas is down more than $1.70 from its peak. That adds up to a typical family with two vehicles to a savings of $180 a month, every single month, that stays in their pockets instead of being spent at the pump. Food inflation is slowing as well. Last month, we saw the smallest increase in food prices in almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And much of that
You know
increase
what?
was due to the
He's going to go on and on and on about bogus economic claims. We want to hear what he says about classified documents. So we'll run to a break here. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Keep it right here. News Talk 710 KNUS. Wrapping up the third hour of the program. Next hour, Dave Kopel of the Independence Institute, David Harsanyi. It's the David Hour. David Harsanyi of the Federalist will join us as well, and we'll talk about the developments regarding Biden's classified documents found in the garage at his Delaware home. Biden is giving remarks now, and it's like Billy and I were talking about this. It's like if Disney was giving a press conference about a new ride, and they spent the first 25 minutes talking about the history of Disney to build up to the new ride. I mean, come on. Here's interesting text. Is it possible that members of his own party orchestrated this because they don't want him to run again? The whole thing seems like a frame-up to me. I'm just not sure by whom. Okay, I don't know about frame-up here, because he got the documents somehow. They didn't just get pulled and then show up. He was responsible for this. He's culpable for it. But the timing, could it be? I don't know. Maybe they're trying to preempt him from making an announcement. I don't know that he's going to run anyway. But there are questions that come in from this text that goes on. The whole thing is fishy. Who was searching? Why were they searching? Are documents routinely taken out of the White House or Congress? There are just too many questions. Yes, those are all legitimate questions. And in fact, there is the question about why his attorneys were rifling through his office, etc., in the first place.
I just ask if you have any information about why the president's personal attorneys were at the Penn Biden Center in the first place. Were they looking for something specific? Was there something specific they were doing going through these documents? It just seems like to send, if it was just routine moving stuff, to send a personal attorney to do that.
I would refer you to the White House counsel's very extensive kind of information on Monday that they provided. So I refer you to that.
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier
He was just asked about classified documents. We'll listen to CBS News.
In a locked garage. Okay, so it's not like you're sitting out in the street. But at any rate, yes, as well as my Corvette. But as I said earlier this week, people know I take classified documents and classified material seriously. I also said we're cooperating fully and completely with the Justice Department's review. As part of that process, my lawyers reviewed other places where documents from my time as vice president were stored, and they finished the review last night. They discovered a small number of documents of classified markings in storage areas and file cabinets in my home and my personal library. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn Center. The Department of Justice was immediately, as was done, the Department of Justice was immediately notified, and the lawyers arranged for the Department of Justice to take possession of the document. So we're going to see all this unfold. I'm confident. Thank you very much.
Good to see you. One answer.
She's doing really well. She was under a long time for 5 hours because what they were doing is they take out.
He was walking away. That was one question that he took on classified documents, and now talking about First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. No real answers there. No explanations. No, just obfuscation and brushing it off as though it's nothing significant. Oh, well, we immediately notify the Department of Justice, so all is good. Look, that narrative could have worked yesterday when you had one batch. Could have kind of worked, at least trying to drill that point home as far as distinctions between him and Trump and cooperation with the National Archives not being as complete with Trump, shall we say. He could have made that point. But now that we got more batches and it's coming up with his Corvette. Did you notice that? In a locked garage, as well as my Corvette. Real relatable, by the way, for the lunchbox president, right? As well as my Corvette. Wouldn't we all like to have a Corvette in the car, along with classified documents we supposedly take seriously? Whoa. I mean, you just listen to all of that. No wonder he gave one answer, and that is it. Listener keeps insisting this is an Obama issue because of the idea that either President Obama unclassified these documents and allowed the VP to take them, or he stole the documents. It is quite clear that they are, and says this is an Obama issue. Here's the thing. It is quite clear that these were not declassified, because the talk is about classified documents. They're still labeled classified. Same thing with the documents at Mar-a-Lago, apparently still labeled classified. If they're declassified, you need to have some kind of record, either the label and or written documentation saying here is when these documents were declassified. It is quite clear that they were not. And even in the Trump case, there were no pieces of evidence that they put forward yet that he actually did declassify them. They haven't called for, even claimed. The legal team hasn't actually claimed that. And in this case, no, there's no evidence. It would be number two. He stole the documents, or however that would be. But when you're the president of the United States and you say you take classified materials seriously, and then suddenly you have classified documents from your tenure as vice president show up in not one, but two places, a university and your garage at your home. To quote Biden, come on, man. This ain't beanbag. This is politics. This is government. This is the president of the United States at this moment, whose administration has been going after his chief political rival, Donald Trump. Now, that's not to cast judgment one way or the other on what's been going on with Trump and the viability of that case, so much as it is to say the double standard is real and he can't dodge it. And the politics of this, the optics of this, the reality of this ain't looking good for Uncle Joe Biden, President of the United States. Coming up in the next hour, we will talk more about this with David Harsanyi and get his take from the Federalist. We will also be joined at the top of this hour by another David Kopel of the Independence Institute, to get a better understanding of what has been proposed by radical Democrats in the most extreme gun control bill that at least I'm aware of ever being introduced in the Colorado General Assembly. Keep it right here. Jimmy in for George, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Time flying by today. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler, who's been a bit under the weather. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show Saturday morning, 6 to 9, right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Coming up in the next segment, we will be joined by David Harsanyi of the Federalist to get his take on what we just heard from President Joe Biden, again offering up excuses for classified documents being found in his garage at his home, in a locked garage, along with his Corvette. What's going on here? This is, as multiple people have texted in, very strange. Something is odd about all of this. But let's turn local now, as the Colorado General Assembly is back in action for their annual 120 days in session. And this time, they're not waiting at all for the extreme gun control bills. As soon as the assembly convened, Elizabeth Epps, Democratic Socialist in the legislature, introduced an extreme gun control measure that would ban so many guns. Most guns, I think, that you use today. But let's get a better understanding of what's going on here and the constitutionality of this with Dave Kopel, Research Director at the Independence Institute and Adjunct Professor of Advanced Constitutional Law at the University of Colorado Sturm College of Law. Dave, good morning and welcome. It's good to talk with you.
Good morning. And just to be precise, I teach at Denver University, not CU.
Did I just say CU?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was reading from here and I said Sturm College of Law. Thank you for the clarification there. I don't know why I said University of Colorado. But now we know, and I appreciate it very much for you joining us. So, Dave, let's just jump right into it. What are we looking at here with this proposed ban?
This is, well, as you said, it's Representative Elizabeth Epps, who claims that she's against police violence. You know, she positions herself on the very far left. But then after claiming she's against police violence and all these guns she wants to ban are made for killing a lot of innocent people at once in massacres, there's an exemption for the police. So Representative Elizabeth Epps, supposed opponent of police violence, wants the police to have guns that are made for killing a lot of people at once.
Interesting. Funny how that is.
And she's also against, she claims, she's a prison abolitionist, doesn't want to put people in cages. And this is a bill to put lots and lots and lots of people in cages. And, you know, the way gun control happens at sort of the cultural level is it's this argument of supposed urban elites against what they consider backwards white people who live in rural areas. But then when you look at how gun laws actually get enforced, the people who are enforced against the most are people of color in big cities, like Denver. So this is it's a trap to put lots and lots of black people and other people of color in jail and confiscate their guns.
And let's be very clear that the data is abundantly clear on that and has been for many years. So what would this ban entail, Dave Kopel? Because it is very broad, isn't it?
It is, but let's start off with a key thing. It doesn't ban any gun based on how fast it fires. The guns they want to ban just fire with, you press the trigger once, you get one bullet. Want another bullet, press the trigger again, which is basically what the vast majority of common handguns do. And this would ban lots, but not all of common handguns and lots, but not all of common rifles. So it has nothing to do with the gun's rate of fire. And it also doesn't have anything to do with, tell you one exception, but in general, it doesn't ban guns based on their firepower, like how powerful How big is the bullet? How fast does it travel? How much damage can it inflict on the target? The vast majority of the ban has nothing to do with that either. What it does is it bans guns for having features, they call it, that they say are bad. So here's an example. If you have you can have a gun that has a fixed stock, some nice, beautiful wooden stock made out of walnut. Or you can have a gun with an adjustable stock, typically made of plastic or metal. So let's say you have a married couple that owns a gun, and one person in the couple is tall and the other person is short. With an adjustable stock, you can adjust the size of the stock to properly fit the particular user when that person is using the gun. They want to ban that. They say that makes a gun an assault weapon, which is preposterous, of course. The fact that you can move a stock back and forth by 5 inches doesn't make a gun more powerful. So it's replete with things like that. And one of the ways it bans guns in a way that people may not realize is any gun that has a threaded barrel. At the barrel, what the bullet travels through, at the front, the muzzle, a lot of guns come with threads already, factory made, and that is so you can put an attachment on the front of the gun, something that is completely legal in Colorado. It is a suppressor, a sound moderator, sometimes called a silencer, but that's inaccurate because only in the movies does a silencer make a gun actually close to silent. What it typically does is reduce the noise by about 30 decibels, which would say take a common handgun from the sound pressure level of a jet engine, down to the level of a jackhammer, which is still pretty loud in my book.
Yes.
And a silencer is legal in Colorado, and this bill doesn't purport to ban them. But in fact, it does, because the way you attach a suppressor is you screw it onto the front of the barrel. Now, to buy a suppressor, you got to pay a $200 tax, spend months going through a federal registration process. This wouldn't change that, but it would make it impossible to have a suppressor because because you can't have threaded barrels on a handgun, and that's really harmful for hearing. In Europe, which generally has stricter gun controls than the United States, a lot of guns come with a suppressor pre-installed because it's better for hearing protection. It's better to reduce noise so that if you're out in the countryside shooting, then the neighbors who live half a mile away, they hear less noise. It's all, suppressors are all very positive for public health, for health in general, including hearing protection. But they would, oddly enough, not ban silencers, but they ban threaded barrels. And here's one of the key things. So let's suppose you own something you thought was a perfectly normal gun. You bought a rifle with a folding stock 15 years ago. Or, you bought a handgun that happens to have a threaded barrel. Maybe you didn't even care about that. You may not know until it's too late that it has a threaded barrel, but it does. That becomes presumptively illegal in Colorado. The gun that you've owned for decades perhaps, and then they say, well, when the police come and they say, oh, look, you have a handgun with a threaded barrel, you haven't put anything on it, but there you are. The police confiscate the gun, and you have 3 days to prove that you owned the gun before the effective date of this ban. Well, how do you prove it? According to the law, really what you can do is, well, you might have a credit card receipt, they say, but that wouldn't really tell you anything because that just tells you bought something at a particular store. It doesn't list, the credit card receipt doesn't list the items. And they say, well, if you bought it from a gun store, the dealer will have records, which is true, and then you can go to the dealer, and the dealers by law have to keep records for 20 years. So you can go to the dealer and say, can you dig up this old record for me? Maybe they can, maybe they can't, maybe they're computerized or not. But what if you bought the gun from a friend, which was perfectly legal to do in Colorado until 2013? So you bought your handgun with a threaded barrel in 2012, and your friend, not being a gun dealer, doesn't keep detailed records of everything. So there is no record of the sale. So therefore, you're a criminal, and you you get convicted of a crime, and your gun gets confiscated. So it's really a catch-22. And again, this is going to be enforced in against poor people and people in Denver who are disproportionately people of color compared to the rest of the state. They're the ones who are going to get put in this Kafka trap set up by supposed prison abolitionist Elizabeth Epps.
Again, we're talking with Dave Kopel, research director at the Independence Institute, who has filed many amicus briefs on various gun control and gun rights legal matters from all different levels of courts. Appreciate your time this morning. Let's talk about one other aspect of this, which is the kinds of guns that it would ban as far as semi-automatic pistols and what have you. I mean, you have a lot of handguns that, for example, women would like to be able to purchase that are very popular among women. And my understanding is that this bill would ban a heck of a lot of those firearms.
Well, it doesn't ban all. It doesn't ban all semi-automatic firearms.
Mm-hmm.
It's a confusingly written bill,
Sure.
but it doesn't do that. Mm-hmm. It bans guns if they, and again, so it has nothing to do with rate of fire, or ammunition capacity, or the power of the bullet for these bans on semi-automatics. But it does ban guns in very kind of irrational ways. So, for example, we've had a magazine ban in the states since 2013 for magazines over 15 rounds. This new law says, well, suppose the magazine fits in the grip of your handgun. Oh, well, that's okay. But suppose the magazine instead fits, as is the case in some guns, it fits forward in the gun, like underneath the action. Well, what's the difference? The difference is one of those would be banned in Colorado and one would not. Like, why does that matter where the magazine fits in, how the magazine attaches to the gun? I understand the law on magazine capacity, and at least that's regulating something real. There's a difference between a 9-round magazine versus a 16-round magazine. That's a real physical difference. But as to where the magazine fits, who cares? So it's a collection of all these things that have nothing to do with the gun's lethality. But it's not the end game. It's the first step towards banning more and more guns in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Because once this passes, then they'll come back and say, oh, well, there's all these loopholes in this bill we wrote, because even though we banned a lot of guns, we really didn't ban the guns based on firepower. So we'll have to come back and do something else on that in another year, and then we'll come back like Governor Ned Lamont in Connecticut is talking about. Oh, we have to get rid of grandfathering and go around and confiscate guns, also like the government of Canada is planning to do. So it is the first step towards gun confiscation.
So,
it will confiscate a lot of guns from people who can't prove when they bought it.
So if this passes and becomes law, it sounds like it'll be very confusing for people to understand whether their firearms fall under the law or not. I mean, you're describing a slew of different things, and you even said it's written very confusingly. I had a listener saying, this is a little bit confusing. Could you ask your guest if the law would ban a semi-automatic pistol like a Glock 1911? And it sounds like that depends.
Yeah, per se, it wouldn't ban a Glock version of the venerable Colt 1911 pistol. But if you happen to have a threaded barrel on it, then it would ban it.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you a broader question in our remaining couple minutes with you as a professor, adjunct professor of advanced constitutional law at the University of Denver. What is your constitutional analysis of this? Because it seems flagrantly unconstitutional, both in accordance with the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, as well as the guarantees provided in Colorado state constitution.
Well, the guarantees in the Colorado State Constitution from our 1876 Constitution were written in the broadest language possible at the time. As of 1876, every word they chose was to make the right as strong as possible, based on examples from other states and other constitutions. But our Colorado Supreme Court has basically nullified the state constitution right to arms, just like it nullifies other parts of the Constitution it doesn't like the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or the bans on, for example, taking private property from a small business so you can give it to a big business. The Colorado Supreme Court puts itself in the position where they can redline and in effect delete parts of the Constitution they don't like, and they've deleted about 7% of our state constitution. So in court, don't count on winning a case on the Colorado Constitution.
Fair enough.
On the U.S. Second Amendment, which does apply to the state of Colorado, which has to obey it, the U.S. Supreme Court has said we have a test that is based. You should look first of all to the text and the original meaning of the Second Amendment, from 1791, and then you can see how that is elucidated or filled in with details by the subsequent mainstream American legal tradition, particularly in the time closer to the Second Amendment, but then going on through much of the 19th century. And you can not only have the kind of gun laws that existed back in those days that were widespread and common, like bans on discharging a gun, on New Year's Eve just for fun and when you're inside town, but you can also make analogies to those laws and think of and the analogies can allow new types of laws to exist that are similar to older laws. The problem for the gun ban lobbies is there's nothing like that in American legal history up to 1900. The only thing that really comes even close is in 1893, Florida enacted a licensing law for quote Winchesters and other repeating rifles, and that was a law that was, as a Florida Supreme Court justice later pointed out, only enforced against black people, and was conceded to be unconstitutional if anyone ever tried to apply it to the white population. So there is no legitimate precedent in this country for this type of ban under the Supreme Court's standards.
Wow.
But there's a difference between having a case in front of the Supreme Court versus having the case in front of lower federal court judges, some of whom just go ahead and straightforwardly enforce what the Supreme Court tells them to do, and others who come up with evasions and refuse to follow it.
That's a nice way of putting it. Evasions. By the way, for those listeners texting or wondering, when does this new law go into effect? It has not been passed. It has only been introduced in the state house, and God willing, it won't pass the house. But if it does pass the house, hopefully it won't pass the Senate. If it does pass both, hopefully Governor Polis won't sign it into law. But we all need to be aware of this when it comes up for committee, testimony, etc. The public definitely will want to make sure that you have your say. We are out of time here. Dave Kopel of the Independence Institute, also the University of Denver's Sturm College of Law. Really appreciate your time this morning, as always. Thanks for coming on. And by the way, I encourage folks to check out your op-ed from last weekend in the Denver Gazette. Assault weapon still a bogeyman for Colorado polls. Thanks so much, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to continue our Dave Hour in the next segment with David Harsanyi of the Federalist, who will join us to discuss the latest developments in the saga of Joe Biden's classified documents showing up now in his locked garage with his Corvette. Don't we all want a Corvette? Sounds nice to me. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. Keep it right here. News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Rocking and rolling back, Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler this morning here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Thanks for joining us and being a part of the program. President Biden, just a little bit ago, gave a press conference. Well, not really. He answered two questions. One from Fox News' Peter Doocy about the classified documents that showed up now we know this is the second batch discovered yesterday at his Delaware home in a locked garage, as well as my Corvette, he said, and really tried to emphasize that the DOJ immediately notify the archives about this. First of all, why in the world were lawyers or whomever sifting through his garage, finding things, or the University of Pennsylvania, his office there, looking for documents back in November in that case, November 2nd, several days before the election? What are we to make of all this? And to what extent does it really matter? Let's talk about it with senior editor at the Federalist, David Harsanyi, who joins me now. Good morning, David. Happy New Year and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So let me just ask you a broad question. Where are we at with this thing right now, David?
Well, that's pretty broad. I think we're at
exactly.
We're at a place where, you know, we had a lot of talk about how important it was to lock down classified documents, how vital it was to democracy to ensure that the presidents don't abuse.
We're talking with David Harsanyi. Your signal's a little weak there, David. I'm going to ask Bill to check on that, please, for just a moment. Again, this is a rather striking proceeding here. Like, when you think about the way that it has developed, first we get news of documents that had been uncovered on November 2nd, and then we get to, and that was several days before the election, 6 days before the election in midterms? And then we get to yesterday when a second batch was discovered, and now we know it was in his home's garage. I mean, stunning. We have David Harsanyi back with us. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and I think, the main thing to remember here is that initially we were told that there were big distinctions between the Trump case and the Biden case, and one of them was that, Biden had these papers in his office of his think tank. It's a very serious place, but Donald Trump had them lying around his own home. Well, now we have documents lying around Joe Biden's garage and an adjacent room, whatever that means. Another distinction, was that, the number, Trump had many more, which really is kind of, it's maybe legally relevant, but politically it's kind of irrelevant. It matters what's on those documents. Why are they being taken? Why, things like that. But now with another small batch, if we get another small batch from Biden, we'll have a full, cache of documents as well. So, it's just interesting that all those rationalizations for why it's okay what Biden has done, of course, are not really that operational anymore. And I guess the last quick one would be that everyone's saying, well, Biden's cooperating. Well, he's cooperating with his own administration and his own attorney general. That's not really that impressive. Moreover, you don't have to cooperate. Maybe I'll get a lawyer and I'll argue about something. It doesn't necessarily make it mean that Joe Biden's not lying about why he has those documents or his aides, etc.
Sure. Well, he seems not to know. And in fact, according to yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, he was surprised. Take a listen to this.
He had a closet with
His
classified
lawyers
information in
did
it
the
that
right
they found. How did it get
again.
Did the
He
lawyers
did.
do
He
the
was
right thing?
surprised that the records were there. He spoke to this
But they were
personally.
there.
He was surprised that the records were there.
Is he surprised that the records are next to his Corvette in his garage, David Harsanyi? I mean, that was hard to believe too.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows if he was surprised? I don't know if his aides were surprised. I don't know if the think tank people were surprised. Because, they report it as a fact, but that's just what they say, not what we know. They wouldn't, if Donald Trump said, boy, I was really surprised to find this here, they wouldn't take him for his word. They'd want to investigate and they'd want a special counsel.
No, absolutely. You know, I'm curious from the media coverage standpoint. Again, we're talking with David Harsanyi, senior editor at the Federalist. Initially, it seemed to be something that the media was sort of just carrying the water for Biden. But then yesterday, you saw Ed O'Keefe of CBS pressing on the timeline and others pushing back that are not named Ducey from Fox News. And I wonder to what extent the media is actually going to press on this and why they actually seem to, at least to some extent, have a little bit of an interest in this that maybe we didn't see in the first day or two.
Listen, there are always outliers, I think, in the media that do a good job. So when I say media, I always implicit in that is that there are some good people out there. But in general, it seems to me very much that this story was being managed, that they were just repeating talking points. Like, why are these two stories separated? It seems pretty clear to me. It's because they didn't want the number of documents to seem as big as the number that Trump had. And that's why it's a 2-day release. Remember, they found these documents before the midterm, supposedly, and then they went, they were diligently rummaging through everything, looking for more documents, and they just happened to find them after the midterms, and now they happen to find more 2 days after the initial story. Well, that's pretty interesting happenstance, I think.
Yeah. So how does this play out politically in your assessment, David? Because look, the Democrats were trying to make a big to-do, understandably why they would, about Donald Trump. Now you have the sitting president of the United States with documents showing up just days before the election at a university. Now in his garage next to his Corvette, which is really good sounding for the average American hearing about his Corvette and so forth. I'm just curious kind of what the political implications are in your view.
Well, I mean, I know how people will react. They'll just say the Democrats will keep saying it's different. It's just completely different because Biden's a good person and Trump is evil, et cetera. But I'm not sure it's going to play with the American people because I just don't understand how the American people at all, frankly, So, I mean, I don't know how this plays, but it seems to me it's going to be really weird if the special counsel that's now investigating Trump on classified documents is going to say, let's prosecute the former president of the United States who's running for president, while the sitting president basically has done the same thing. And he's going to just get to walk away scot-free. That's going to be a pretty interesting thing for people to hear about.
What do you make of the distinction that they have been making that, we had returned the documents right away as soon as we realized this, we contacted the archives, versus Trump, who really, I mean, the FBI had to show up and take documents with a subpoena. So then they say, that makes all the difference in the world because one, you got cooperation, the other, you don't have cooperation. So we could trust Biden.
Did Biden hand them right over? He had them for 7 years, right? I mean, the idea that he handed them right over is ridiculous. He says they just saw it and they just found it and they handed it over. But that's the point. We don't know that that's what happened. And maybe it is. I don't know. But we don't know. And, he's had them for 7 years and he did not cooperate with the Trump administration and hand over any documents because, it is important as a just to note politically, what are on these documents. They report, CNN reported yesterday that one of them had Ukrainian stuff on it. Well, there's a lot of going on with Ukrainian interest and Joe Biden. Even the Obama administration was worried about his actions there. And, so are those documents that would have been embarrassing if they had gotten into the hands of a Republican administration? I mean, it seems like a reasonable thing to want to ask.
A few minutes before you said this, I love the text. You made this point, but before I end, the listener pointing out, he immediately notified them after however many years of having the documents, immediately, in quotes. And I mean, here's the thing. The American people right now, David Harsanyi, really do have such low trust in politicians writ large. I mean, how much attention are the American people going to pay to this story and to the Trump story now? How much will they really care given the issues that are going on and sort of their general suspicion already about people, whether they are Republican or Democrat, who are in government?
Probably not a ton. I mean, it's kind of like a process story, I guess. I mean, unless there's going to be an actual criminal indictment or something of Trump, I think then the story becomes very different. So I don't think anyone's mind is being changed or anything like that. I think it probably, just feeds into that distrust people have of government. But I will say it becomes really grating to see these two tiers basically of justice, that everything one party does is the worst thing ever. It's an attack on democracy. It's crumbling the foundations of our institutions. And then the other side does it, and then they pretend it's just no big thing. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I think that double standard really hurts trust, at least on one side.
David Harsanyi, our guest senior editor at the Federalist. I want to shift gears here for just a moment, because you wrote a little bit about this in the media a couple of days ago, but you also had, and I love the headline of your piece, and we talked about this in the show yesterday when I filled in for George. Why won't Democrats protect us from stoves that want to murder us in our sleep? Okay, let's talk about this proposed ban on gas stoves. David, how have we gone so long with gas stoves even being allowed in the first place? I just don't know. As you say, save us, Elizabeth Warren.
Well, let's talk about the timeline for a second. First they bring this up, they float. It's a trial balloon. They want to see how people react. So they say, let's ban stoves. They're the worst thing ever. They kill children. I can't believe we still have them. They're bad for the environment. Republicans say, wow, that's pretty crazy. You're nuts. You want to do this. They point it out. Then they pull back the trial balloon because it didn't work out, even though Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, AOC, tons of politicians were out there yesterday, like, talking about this like it's been an issue forever. Like, how could you not even, how could you even want stoves? Like, are you nuts? And then they pull it back. And then the stories today are like, look at these crazy Republicans talking about gas stoves. Aren't they crazy? They're pouncing, on this thing. So it's like that's how these things constantly unfold. The truth is that it's actually an important story. One, because it's already happening in California and New York and in other liberal states. And they want to do this, and they're going to do it in the long run. And it actually has more of an effect on the normal average American than most of the political stuff that we talk about. This is an actual thing that will have something, undermine that their lives in some way. And it's just based on pseudoscience. In my opinion, it's just a green, they just want to get gas out of your home so they can get everything on the grid and then, have it run with the sun and wind, et cetera.
Well, and then we know what happens when you get into electric vehicles and then the government says, wait, we actually can't let you charge your vehicles because it's too cold or this and that. What about when that happens, when everything's on the grid and, you're not easily able to get your stove going?
Well, wasn't it in Denver, I think, a few years ago that they turned off the thermostats one day when I think the grid was being taxed or something? I forget exactly where it was, but that already happens. Yeah, I think the thing is, and this is a more serious issue, underlying issue here, is that I just don't think progressives and most Democrats and many Republicans, especially Democrats, have any limiting government principles. They just, to them, if they can get away with it and control something within your house and take it away from you, which seems petty, but it's actually quite a big thing. As far as, in my view, because what they're saying is that we can go in your house and take away stuff that you have and like just because we want to.
Right. Well, it's because they know better. The all-knowing, all-powerful government should be allowed to just come in and dictate those basic aspects to your life. So here's the question, David Harsanyi, final question for you. What do you think if the Democrats do move forward at some point with banning these gas stoves and take other similar steps? Is there a point at which the American people will really just say enough is enough? I know Republicans to control the House, but will there be a point at which they will say, we're done with all of this? You fill in the blank.
No. I mean, I don't see it happening that way. It's for the left, it's always incremental. It's always, here's the trial balloon. Oh, you're crazy. We'll never do that. That'll never happen. And then they just do it statewide, and then it sort of proliferates, right?
Yeah. Wow. Unfortunately, I tend to agree with you there. David Harsanyi, senior editor at the Federalist. Always great to check in with you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, David Harsanyi of the Federalist joining us. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler. We're going to take a break. Some final thoughts on the other side. Boy, is time flying by. News Talk 710 KNUS. Flying by. Jimmy Sengenberger been filling in today for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Appreciate the text. Good show today, Jimmy. You and William do a good job. I appreciate it. William always does a mighty fine job. Bill Thorpe, the fixture here on the George Show. Whether it is George hosting, me filling in, or somebody else sitting in the chair, you know, you got a good old Bill Thorpe making sure the train runs on time. Good to be with you today. As always, we will watch with great interest, and I'll talk about it more on my Saturday show, I'm sure, 6 to 9, the Jimmy Sengenberger Show Saturday morning, leading into Peter Boyle's 9 to noon. But this is just, something is so strange about this whole story about Biden's classified documents. Again, the question was asked by multiple listeners texting in. Why the attorneys? Why were they sifting through in the University of Pennsylvania? Why in his locked garage alongside his Corvette?
I just ask if you have any information about why the president's personal attorneys were at the Penn Biden Center in the first place. Were they looking for something specific? Was there something specific they were doing going through these documents? It just seems like to send, if it was just routine moving stuff, to send a personal attorney to do that.
I would refer you to the White House counsel's very extensive kind of information on Monday that they provided. So I refer you to that.
But it's a reasonable question, right? Why were those documents recovered when they were recovered, and why years after he'd left office? What was going on here? And why the double standard when it comes to Trump? Increasingly, it becomes less and less viable to argue, oh, there's a massive difference with Trump when you have random documents or documents supposedly randomly popping up. Really? What in the world? Well, then again, this is the same administration that says, oh, it's just a coincidence that when Biden was down at the southern border, there weren't really many illegal immigrants around.
He didn't talk to any migrants, and he didn't go anywhere that people actually cross illegally. Why not?
But he went to the migrant center, which was a critical place to be when you think about the partners who are our partners who are helping support the migrants on the ground there. There happened to be no migrants at the facility at the time that he visited. But let's
because El Paso has been crushed. The shelters are full. There are overflow migrants sleeping in the streets, and then it's just a coincidence that suddenly the president shows up and.
Well, let me talk about what's going on in El Paso, right? El Paso did go down significantly prior to the president's visit by about 70%. And that's a good thing.
Yes. Okay. It was just cleaned up. Just purely coincidental. Just like it's purely coincidental that 2 days after the news got out that Biden had classified documents at the University of Pennsylvania in his so-called think tank, that more documents are uncovered this time and returned to the National Archives. This time in the garage of his home by his Corvette. With his Corvette. Because that somehow seems to justify it or something. I don't know. Well, that's just one more time. Let's remember Joe Biden last year talking about Trump.
When you saw the photograph of the top secret documents laid out on the floor at Mar-a-Lago, what did you think to yourself looking at that image?
How that could possibly happen, how anyone could be that irresponsible. And I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that, I mean names of people who helped or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
Totally irresponsible. He says, come on, man. Totally irresponsible. I like this text. Where are the photos of the classified documents spread out on the hood of Biden's Corvette? Joe, what did you think when you saw these documents spread out? Yeah. I don't think we're going to see those images. I think they just bundled them up and said, oh, we're going to give them right on back collected. But I do like the visual of Biden's classified documents spread out on the hood of his Corvette in the garage where they were suddenly found because he's all so surprised.
He had a closet with classified
His lawyers
information in
did
it
the
that
right
they found. How did it get
again.
Did the
He
lawyers
did.
do
He
the
was
right thing?
surprised that the records were there. He spoke to this
That they were
personally.
there?
He was surprised that the records were there.
Tom Rogan at the Washington Examiner wrote the following a day or two ago. This decision, that is as far as what's going on with Biden and his documents and so forth, will significantly weaken the perceived apolitical credibility of any future decision by the Justice Department to charge Trump. The Justice Department must always decide whether proceeding with charges is in the public interest. Biden has greatly undermined that argument via his own classified document problems and associated hiding of that scandal from the public. And by the way, that was hidden from the public for 2 months. It may have suddenly somehow been discovered by Biden's lawyers at the University of Pennsylvania and then turned over quickly. But why are we only hearing about it now? Trying to cover up, huh? What about this other batch? Look, the more that these batches come up, the more that we learn, the less credible it is to make that distinction and say, well, at least he cooperated, unlike Trump. You kidding me? Let's just say that everybody in government needs to get their stuff in order and better track these documents and what happens with classified documents, the records, etc. And by the way, to the listener texting, you do remember that Trump said he declassified all those documents, right? It's one thing for Trump to say it. It's another thing for his lawyers to present it and say, oh, here we claim that he just declassified these documents and here's the documentation that we did. They didn't provide that. I thought exactly as you did, but there's no evidence that's been given by Trump's legal team that he actually did declassify those documents. But it's neither here nor there in the context of the Biden situation. In both instances, you have questions that legitimately will be raised, and it undercuts the anti-Trump stuff. What's going on with Biden? Political implications. Fascinating. Donald Trump on the campaign trail is going to have a lot of ammunition against Biden and his administration. Fair enough. To the texter, I think so, too. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. I'll be in Saturday, 6 to 9 for my show. Have a great one. Stay warm, and God bless America.